Hello and welcome to the TID Water and Power Podcast. I'm your host, Constance Anderson, and on this month's episode, we're celebrating 5 years of the TID Water and Power Podcast. The podcast officially launched in May 2021. And over those 5 years, we've brought you 60 full episodes, 10 mini episodes, 70 amazing guests, and 58 hours of content. So to celebrate 5 years of the podcast, we want to take a look back at some impactful episodes and informative moments, and have compiled short clips from several interviews throughout the years. The TID Water and Power Podcast has far surpassed our original expectations, largely because of the support from our listeners. As of May 2026, the podcast has been downloaded a whopping 23,000 times. We regularly see large groups of listeners locally, as well as in the Sacramento area, and even track listenership from across the United States and as far away as Germany and India. Even after 139 years of service, Turlock Irrigation District's story is just beginning, and we've got lots more to share. Thanks for tuning in for the last 5 years. We hope you are as excited as us about what's to come in the next 5. From Episode 1, May 2021, the inaugural episode with General Manager Michelle Reimers. An important figure in TID's modern history, Michelle was TID's first female general manager and the original champion of the TID Water and Power Podcast. In your 15 years at the district, you've likely seen a lot of change take place. In what ways do you want to see the district continue to change under your tenure?
Well, I do think that both the water and energy landscapes are both changing. And I do see the district, I recognize the district has made some changes, and I do see us continuing to make changes to be able to adapt to, the industry changing as a whole. I see themes like, investing in water conservation, new investments in technology, expecting to be able to produce or perform to our customers' expectations. Looking at business model changes of, renewables are coming online, and, how are we going to integrate those into our system? And perhaps do we need to look at, like I said, business model changes. Employee engagement, I think, is huge for us, and it's changing. And it's, we have both sides of the house. We have water and power, and we're doing our best now to find that water energy nexus and have more collaborative meetings and integrate different people from different backgrounds to be a part of larger conversations and solutions. And hoping that has a more of an engaged workforce from the top all the way down to the bottom. I also see us building more relationships with our community and partnering with our customers and truly being a trusted partner rather than just the utility.
What other projects are going on at TID right now that you'd like to share?
Well, we're working on a lot of different things, but some things I wanted to point out today. We did purchase property last year to build what's called another regulating reservoir. So we recently constructed one in the Hillmar area. And I guess I should back up and say our system is, over 250 miles of gravity-fed canal system. So that's amazing, right? Built in the 1900s, still works today. Love the fact that it doesn't use energy to move through our system. But what that means is, the system is meant to spill. And then the water landscape that we're in today, water conservation is on everyone's mind. And so we're looking at trying to make an improvement in a system that's well over 100 years old, and trying to reinvent it. And a regulating reservoir is a really good tool to do that. It essentially captures the water in the lower end of the system and acts almost like a Turlock Lake or a Don Pedro, right? It captures the water, and then when it's ordered or throughout the system, we're able to re-release it. And there's 3 positive things out of a regulating reservoir. Obviously, there's water conservation, so you're minimizing spills. You're improving customer service. So a lot of people at the end of the line, unfortunately, in dry years, we're trying to run as tight as we can with every drop, that they might get shorted a little bit. And so improving customer service in that area is an improvement. And then The third is also water quality. There's a lot of water quality benefits out of a regular reservoir when you recapture and blend and then send back down the system. So we're excited about that. We are in the design phase, and we hope to be shovel ready by the middle of this year. We are hearing about a lot of grants opportunities, both at the state and federal level, and TID is going to make every effort to try to see if that project would qualify for some grant funding. Other things that we're looking at, we've been looking at and analyzing solar within our service territory for quite some time. This is kind of bittersweet because the land in our territory is very valuable, and that's because of the water side. And so, we're very proud of that. But it makes
that overlap between power and water, right?
So we, it's just challenging to find, some acreage here that we would purchase, and that's, relatively affordable. And then also, with the mindset of, we are an agricultural community, and the balance of, ag land versus non-ag land. So, and just to put it in perspective, about 5 acres equals about 1 megawatt. So, Don Pedro's 203 megawatts, and, our natural gas fired power plants one is 250 megawatts, just to put it in perspective of, the amount of acres we would need and the megawatts we would need to actually make it, more like a utility scale, is quite a lot on both sides. So that's forced us to look at, what properties do we own, what properties are not being utilized by the agriculture industry. And then, really points to, hey, we have this canal system. And I think a lot of people have seen recently, there was a study out of the country that they illustrated that they could put solar on canal systems. And that's something we are actually evaluating today. We do own the canals, and most of our electric system is, sharing that same canal bank. And so is there an opportunity for us to capitalize on the infrastructure that's already being used today? So analyzing that.
So we're nearing the end of our time together. So I just want to make sure, is there anything else that we haven't yet touched on that you wanted our listeners to know or wanted to make mention of?
Yeah, I mentioned before that I truly wanted TID to become a trusted community partner, and that's been one of my tenets and part of, our strategic plan process. But I really think it's important for people to, remember that we are community owned, that we're not for profit, that we work for them. And I think a lot of people forget that. And so it's very important. They have 5 board members that are locally elected, and their voice truly matters. And there's a lot of benefits of locally owned, community owned public power, benefits. And so I just want to flag that is going to be a new theme that you'll start hearing from TID. We've increased our social presence, and here we are doing a podcast, and we really want to connect with our customers and, again, be that trusted community partner.
From episode 3, July 2021, Don Pedro relicensing with Michael Cook. Nearly 5 years later, the relicensing saga still continues today. So if we have now an annual license, since the original 50-year license expired, why is it important that we obtain this new long-term license?
The goal is to create some certainty for our growers. By law, we have to get a license, and being kind of on a probationary status or a year-to-year basis is not a very stable state of affairs. So our goal is to get the best license we can that allows Turlock Irrigation District to continue its vital function to the community while recognizing our key role in being responsible stewards of the Tuolumne River.
And in going through this process, what would we consider a favorable length of license?
Well, ideally, we'd get a 40 to 50-year license. I think that's possible. Again, the goal of that is just to create some certainty for the district and its growers and its customers. It's almost like they're very responsible and smart and resourceful people. It's like facing a medical diagnosis. They're saying, just tell it to me straight and let me deal with it from there. And so if we can get a license and we say, this is what we have to deal with for the next 40 years, that gives them a longer term outlook. They can start making some informed business decisions from there and creates a degree of certainty in everything we do.
That makes sense. If you've owned the home and you have a mortgage, you're likely to feel better about doing the upgrades to keep up that home, and as opposed to if you're renting month to month. That makes sense. That's
exactly right.
And what if we didn't relicense Don Pedro? Is that an option?
No. I mean, the license for Don Pedro is the district's very existence. It's the heart and soul of what we do. Don Pedro is an incredibly valuable resource. I mean, Turlock Irrigation District has 150,000 acres of the best farmland in the world, not just in California, not just the United States, but in the world. We have 5,800 growers, 100,000 electrical customers, which generates $5 billion in economic output, $750 million in labor income, 19,000 jobs. You know, TID is publicly owned. Don Pedro belongs to the people of this region. We're a publicly owned irrigation district. It's kind of part of our DNA for the area. So it's a reason we're here, and we want to keep it.
Let's take a quick look at sort of the timeline of the relicensing process. So TID and MID began the relicensing process in 2010. Is that right?
That's correct. And so by 2011, working with FERC, they provided us with a list of special studies they wanted the districts to conduct as part of the relicensing effort. So in total, we worked on 35 studies, 20 related to water and aquatic resources, 9 regarding terrestrial resources, and 4 recreational resources, and 2 on cultural resources. There's a number of paths to relicensing. And what we did, we chose what's called the Integrated Licensing Process, or ILP route, which is a very open and collaborative process. It allows us to collaborate and agree with various agencies and the public before we submit our application. So the public and the regulatory agencies helped us define the scope of work for those 35 studies I mentioned. And through a number of public meetings and workshops and written comments, we worked on those 35 studies over a number of years. We recognize, and the board recognizes, there's a number of stakeholders on the Tuolumne River, not just state and federal regulatory agencies, but conservation, environmental groups, recreational groups, the public, and other interested parties. So we worked with all those groups over about a 5-year period to put those 35 studies together.
That is a lot of collaboration and patience, I would imagine, to try and, as you referred earlier to the ringmaster, to try and bring all those different interests together. Wow.
That's correct. And again, but that's the whole point of that integrated licensing process, to bring everybody together, to work in an open dialogue, to work through those studies and provide that information to FERC.
All right. So you referred earlier to the various studies that were conducted on topics ranging from water quality to fish and wildlife, recreation, tribal resources, as you mentioned. Tell us a little bit more about the purpose of these studies and how did we use that information?
So the goal of the relicensing process is to see what impacts the project, what we call the projects, so Don Pedro and LaGrange, have on the environment and other resources. So, for instance, one of the concerns is the impact of having 2 dams on the river and their impact to native fish species, particularly migratory fish species like Chinook salmon. So we too are very concerned about the number of salmon on the Tuolumne. We feel there's a number of stressors on those fish that have impacted their numbers over the years. So one of the things we did was what's called a predation study. Over the years, non-native species or non-native fish species have been added to the delta and the Tuolumne River. And these non-native species actually feed on native species. So particularly in our case, striped bass, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass actually feed on young Chinook salmon. And that's limiting their migration out to the river and eventually, ever coming back for spawning. In fact, the analysis we showed that non-native bass eat more than 90% of juvenile salmon before they even reach the San Joaquin River. And we saw it very much so this year. We had a number of juvenile salmon, but literally only a handful made it to Grayson, where the Tuolumne River meets up with the San Joaquin River. So one of these special studies was kind of cool, and not to get too nerdy, but we take groups of 300 salmon from a hatchery in Merced and put acoustic tags on them or photo mark them, and then basically follow them as they move down the river and try to figure out what happened to them. What we found out, based on various conditions and various flow conditions in different days, 93 to 98% never made it to the San Joaquin River.
Wow.
So they were released near Waterford and never made it to the San Joaquin. And so part of that study included fishing for striped bass, investigating their stomach contents, where lo and behold, we found quite a bit of native salmon. So we see that as one of the challenges. So one of the things we're offering as part of our relicensing process is to put some predation measures in place to try and limit the number of non-native species on the Tuolumne, which will then hopefully reduce the amount of predation and increase the number of salmon that migrate back and forth to the ocean and back to the Tuolumne. So we're excited about that.
From episode 7, November 2021, Water Rights with Jason Karkeet. Probably the best explanation of the complicated California water rights system you'll ever hear. Starting our conversation about water rights, let's start at kind of a 30,000 foot level and talk about California rights in general. So what exactly are water rights?
Water rights in California are what are called usufructuary rights. They're rights for a use of something. In California, the water is a public trust. It belongs to the state of California. So the rights themselves are to use the water, not to own the water.
That's an important distinction. And what types of rights are there?
Well, there are a few types of rights in California, but the two main ones that we deal with at TID are riparian rights and appropriative rights. Now, riparian rights are from the old English common law system that were adopted in the United States, primarily on the East Coast where it's wetter. You see more riparian rights, which are the type of rights that are tied to the land. So if a party owns a parcel of land that abuts the waterway, that party has riparian rights. And those rights are to use the water to the extent that it can be put to beneficial use, not excessive or unreasonable use. And riparian rights are correlative, which means that they're shared proportionally among all of the parties along the river. So let's say, for example, Constance, you have a parcel next to mine and it's twice as large as my parcel, and we have the same kind of uses. Let's say we both have pasture. Well, since we have the same type of use, really you have the right to twice as much water as I have because you have twice as much riparian land. One of the interesting things, though, is that you don't have absolute right to that amount of water, because as the water in the waterway decreases, there's less water for all to have access to. So as your right to use the water kind of diminishes with the supply, mine also proportionally diminishes. So they're correlative in that way.
Okay, so those are riparian rights where the property abuts the waterway. And then how do we define appropriative rights?
Well, appropriative rights, whereas with riparian rights, the rights are attached to the ownership of the property. Appropriative rights are for diverting water off stream and using it on parcels away from the waterway. And they have 5 distinct characteristics that define them. The first one is your rate or volume of diversion. How much water are you going to take off the waterway? The second one is your point of diversion. Where along the waterway are you going to pull that water? The third one is the purpose of use. Is it going to be for stock watering or irrigation or maybe for municipal water supply? The fourth one is your place of use, like the location of your parcel, for example, or the location of your municipality that you're going to serve. And the fifth one is the priority of right. And that's where we get into this principle of first in time is first in right. Say, for example, you and I each own a parcel that's 10 miles off stream. So we're going to file for appropriative rights. And you happen to actually be downstream from me, and I'm then, of course, upstream from you. And I go and file for my right, say, a month before you do. And I start building my ditch and I start diverting water before you do. Well, even though technically your diversion point's downstream, I filed and started diverting before you. So my right has a priority date before yours, and that puts me first in time, which then makes me first in right.
Okay, so now let's drill down a little bit into TID specific water rights. What types of rights does the district have, or does the district own?
Well, TID jointly owns its rights with Modesto Irrigation District, but we'll simply refer to TID in this case, or we'll call them districts, the districts. Districts have both riparian rights and appropriative rights. Our riparian rights are for power generation for properties we have right on the river or adjacent to the river. And our appropriative rights are for both power generation and irrigation. And among the appropriative rights, we have direct diversion rights and we have rights to storage. So some of the water, when there's a lot of inflow coming into Don Pedro, there's more than we're going to store maybe in a given day. What we're sending down the Upper Main Canal will actually be from direct diversion rights for some of that inflow. And then the water that we're not using from that inflow, we collect a storage in Don Pedro, or also we can collect storage in Turlock Lake. And there's where we use the two different, direct diversion and storage rights.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about maintaining our rights. So we file for the right, assuming the rights are granted. Are those rights a property of the district forever, or what do we need to do to maintain ownership of those rights?
Well, that's another interesting question, Constance, because with the beneficial use principle tied to that is this idea that you have to use it or you lose it. With water rights, there's a concept of perfection, and that means I might claim a right to 100 CFS, but if I only divert continuously about 80, that means I've perfected actually a right for 80. I don't really have a right to 100 CFS. So as long as we're using that water and putting it to beneficial use, it firms up and protects that right. So being good stewards, using the rights effectively and efficiently, that's the best way to protect them. And the community's really done a good job too by converting irrigation to some efficient systems whereby we can actually grow more and do more with the same amount of water that we have always had.
From episode 12, April 2022, Hydrological Forecasting and Modeling with Olivia Kramer and Wes Monnier. This is a topic that continues advancing at TID, so much so that Olivia and Wes have made a combined 8 appearances on the TID Water and Power Podcast. There are some other tools out there that TID has implemented and takes advantage of and works into our regular modeling and forecasting. Let's talk a little bit more about some of those. How about starting with the Airborne Snow Observatory?
So the Airborne Snow Observatory program, they take an airplane and they're basically scanning the watershed with a laser, and they're measuring the depth of the snow. And for me, being in these wet years, when you get into, say, June, and there's no more snow course measurements, even if you had the snow course measurements, you don't understand what's going on up there. You have a value from a regression calculation. The ASO program scans that watershed, and the analogy I use is it's equivalent to a thermometer versus an MRI or a CAT scan. So one is a point location on the end of a problem. The other one is a full scan of the health of the system, your body, right? And so that's the health of the watershed. It's the ability to go out and touch the watershed. Whereas prior to that, in 2017, I think it was June or July, we were on a big call, and you said, well, what's going on up there? Well, my aunt's cabin still got 8 feet of snow on it. That's the state of the art versus what we have now with this program. You have a 3-dimensional picture of the whole watershed, and it's not a new tool. It's not a new mousetrap. It is a whole different way of looking at it.
But Wes, I want to go back to something you mentioned, because you referenced the previous model, which included 17 different points of measurement in the snowpack. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the historic since the 30s is they go out and they take a tube and they stick it in the snow, push it all the way down to the dirt, and then they pull it back out and they measure the weight of the snow in the tube. So if you have the diameter of the tube and you have the length of the tube or the length of the ice, you know the volume. And if you measure it, if you got the weight of the tube and the ice and subtract the weight of the tube, now you got the weight of the ice. And so between those two, you can calculate the volume of water. And so the idea is well, if you measure 3 feet of water at this location, say, for example, Dana Meadows, and you extrapolate that out over the watershed, you're going to get if you have enough years, you can estimate the volume of water that's up there in the watershed. That's really, since you're comparing that to the actual runoff, you're estimating the actual runoff, not really what's up there. So you don't know what's up there. It's a guess. And the regression calculation, that's a mathematical tool. And basically you're dealing with the relationships of the water content and the measurement versus the runoff. And it's those two relationships. And of course, in a 1977 year, you've got a small amount and you've got a small amount of runoff. So in a wet year, in 2017, you've got a large snowpack and you've got a large runoff. And that is the relationship only, nothing else. And again, I view that as a calculation, whereas the technology that Olivia is dealing with is a model of the environment. And it worked, got us to where we're at, but it is not sufficient to deal with the issues that we're facing.
Yeah, and just to kind of bring it back to what we were talking about earlier is, like Wes mentioned, that process is what we relied on for the whole first, part of the history for Don Pedro, was that information, and it served us pretty well. But it did have a high amount of uncertainty. So that's the idea of, you had this product, it was good enough for the time, but now that we're seeing these changes in the way that our snowpack is distributed, so it's no longer the same snowpack that they made the regressions on. So we're seeing these changes, and then you're having these huge hydrologic years that were outside of what that regression was created upon. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things compounding, now that uncertainty has gotten so much larger. And so that's the benefit of bringing in a product like ASO, is we were noticing that the snow survey, the B120 process, it was no longer serving us as well in these record-breaking years. And so that's where we wanted to bring in ASO, and we were the first watershed to bring in the ASO technology when we partnered with NASA on that. But I think now everyone within the state is seeing the benefits of ASO. TID has been a great example of those benefits. And we now have 9 watersheds that are using ASO technology within California. And the idea is, every snow-dominant watershed within California having access to ASO data to inform their operations, like we said.
From episode 14, June 2022. How TID became the first irrigation district in California, with Dr. Alan Patterson. Our first guest, who wasn't a TID employee, yet still an incredible wealth of TID knowledge and history. So how did, if they did, the community support this public project?
Well, it seems like they got very enthused, very quickly on that. The election of 1886, young Modesto attorney by the name of C.C. Wright was elected to the assembly on a platform of irrigation, proposed legislation to promote irrigation. He easily won his election. His statements at the time were a little bit vague as to what he was going to do, but it quickly became obvious that what he had in mind, and he explained this later, was to create something along the lines of a county government, a government organization encompassing the entire community that would have the ability to finance and operate an irrigation system, a single-purpose governmental entity. So he got right to work in Sacramento in early 1887, drafted his bill. It absolutely sailed through the legislature. He got unanimous votes, in some cases, in the assembly, which is really strange. And irrigation, water in general, had always been a contentious issue in California.
Sure.
Always is a contentious issue in California. And it just sailed through. It was perfect. The governor signed it. Excitement reigned. Cannons boomed in Modesto. Huge, big deal. We have the Right Act. So it allowed for farmers or landowners to petition the county board of supervisors to form an irrigation district according to the various terms of the Right Act. And the petitions were very quickly circulated in the Turlock area. They got the requisite signatures, went to the Board of Supervisors, which held hearings and went over the possibilities and called an election. And that election then occurred on May 28th, 1887. And I think, again, it's important. It's a public vote. Mm-hmm. It's not just landowners voting. It's everybody voting. Everybody. There was not very many people in the area at the time, but the population voted on it, and it passed 291 to 73. Now, it needed a good-sized margin to win. It needed 2/3, and it got more than that. So it did well. So the district was formally organized, as you mentioned earlier, on June the 6th, 1887, the first district organized under the Right Act.
Okay, so as you mentioned, we've got water that's sort of trickling in now to the valley floor. When did irrigation actually begin?
Well, the first known irrigation, March 16th, 1900, when a guy named Henry Stirring became the first farmer to irrigate. He put the water on a parcel of corn. This was irrigated out of a lateral that runs along what is now Hatch Road. Okay. And people came out to see this amazing sight of irrigation. There's water. It's in the canal. It's running. Now, the canal system was still being completed in 1900, so irrigation was sort of, whenever it was there, people could take it if they had their land ready.
Okay.
So there wasn't a lot of land that was ready. Nobody knows how much was actually irrigated. I don't know if Stirring got a second irrigation on his farm. Who knows? The big deal was it had started, and it was available as the laterals across the district were finished and people could get their land leveled up enough to irrigate. So the first real irrigation season was in 1901.
Okay. From episode 19, November 2022, Power Control Center with Adam Labuga. Adam sheds light on what happens when the lights go out. Throughout your time at the district, as we mentioned, you've held several different roles within the PCC, but many of our listeners might not know what the PCC, and by that I mean Power Control Center, what the PCC actually is. Can you give us kind of a brief overview of what the PCC is?
The PCC is everything. Power Control Center, we aren't necessarily experts on one particular thing, but we have our finger in almost everything that goes on at the district. When somebody asks me like, well, hey, what do you do at TID? What am I supposed to, hey, I'm a Power Control Center operator, or hey, I'm a Power Control Center department manager. I'm a manager of this. What does that even mean?
Right.
The way that I can explain it is the Power Control Center operators are air traffic controllers for the electrical grid. And that's an analogy that I've used pretty much my entire career as an operator. People maybe have never seen what a air traffic control building or room looks like, but they kind of vision it, right? You're just kind of routing the planes, and we're essentially routing the electricity and water so that it could be safely and reliably delivered to TID's customers. The thing with that is people turn their lights on at 2 p.m. They turn them on at 2 a.m. With that being said, the operators are there 24/7, 365, nights, holidays, weekends, you name it, they're there. And they're there to ensure that the grid is being operated, that water is being delivered, that customer service is being conducted, that security is being monitored, and every other function that I'm sure we'll go over. Not to mention, these functions that I just mentioned, we do that for TID service area. But the operators also perform most of those same functions for Merced Irrigation District. It's not commonly known that we are the control room for Merced Irrigation District.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so as the grid operator for the district, and as you mentioned, Merced Irrigation District, the PCC has a large role in outage response. When there's an outage somewhere in the district, what happens in the Power Control Center? What does that look like?
Yeah, it could be anywhere from complete and utter chaos to nothing goes on in there. For large outages, the control room or, the power control center knows about them. For example, if a line coming out of a substation is fully does not have electricity on it, right? All the customers that are off of that line are out of power. 99% of the time, the control room is going to know about it by getting a ton of alarms. Now, a ton, what is that? On average, we get about 1,500 alarms per day, and we're probably
Wow.
and we're probably going to get maybe 10 to 15 alarms associated with that. So we kind of know when we have those big outages of 4,000 or 5,000 or 800 or 1,200 customers, however many customers are off of that particular line, we'll know about it. And so even with the large outages, ultimately the goal is to restore power as safely and quickly as possible. So what does the control room do on those particular situations? We'll identify the area that is the problem area, or for example, a car that hit a pole right in that particular spot. Okay. Now we need to coordinate with the troubleshooter from the line department to isolate that particular area, meaning make sure that it's safe, those types of things. And then try to get the rest of the customers back in power by possibly rerouting some of the power. So rather than have 5,000 out, we're only going to have 100 out because we're able to reroute power and get the other 4,900 back in.
The new PCC sounds like a pretty awesome space, but that wasn't always the case for the Power Control Center. Can you tell us a little bit about what the old control room looked like?
So from what we came from was a 1,200 square foot facility that was built in the 70s. And just to date it, the walls were stained yellow from nicotine because back in the day, you could smoke cigarettes inside.
Wow.
No joke. The console itself was basically a lengthy, banquet style table in which we had 6 monitors on each, to mimic each desk. We still had 3 desks. It was very dated. So right now, the distribution map, meaning the map of the entire district that shows where every customer's power is coming from, is electronic. It's on these big TVs that I described. At the old control room, it was a 12 by 30 foot physical map, in which you had to make adjustments, that was operated by hand. Meaning, if a line was out of service, you had to physically go up there, erase that line, and conversely, if a line came back into service, you had to draw that line back in.
Wow.
It's very, it's a relic, to be honest with you.
It sounds like kind of a cross between like a giant whiteboard and a giant bulletin board.
Yes, there you go.
Needless to say, your new location is a bit of an upgrade from the old.
Just a little bit.
Which it should be reassuring for all of our customers in the area, knowing that we've gotten a bit more sophisticated over the years.
Yeah, technology is only going to help improve delivering the water and power to our customers.
From episode 30, October 2023, Community-Owned Power with Scott Corwin of the American Public Power Association. A look at what public power means across the nation. Okay, well, let's talk some public power, shall we?
Sure.
So I think that, power in general is kind of one of those things that so long as folks flip the light switch and the lights come on, they don't really give much consideration to power, where it comes from, or if it's an IOU or a POU that's providing that power. So let's just start with kind of a basic level of what is public power?
Yeah. So at its most basic, it's we define it as not-for-profit, community-owned utilities. One of the more important differences is that not-for-profit dynamic, because right off the bat, you're able to provide costs that are lower from not having a built-in return on investment or return to shareholders that you would in a for-profit entity. But I think even more to the point, when you have customers owning the utility and the governance of the utility is directly responsive to those customers in the community, it creates a culture and a public service dynamic in the utility and just a connection to the community. Folks live and work there and govern it. It's a really nice, as I said, a nice business model with a lot of advantages to it.
Right. And I think it's that communicating that message of what does community owned mean, right? Because we can use that term, but sometimes that doesn't always resonate with our community members, that they are in fact the owners. How do you, when you're talking to people on the street, how do you kind of communicate what that means to be community owned, to be an owner of your utility?
I think one of the best ways to talk about it is that you have a say, you have a vote. It is local governance. Whether it's in public power, we have different forms. We have power districts, irrigation districts, cities, public utility districts that's slightly different in each state and slightly different in each locality. And city councils oversee, sometimes it's committees, but the bottom line in the end is it's answering to the consumers that own the utility. So you have a say. And I think also importantly, that folks will listen to you and are responsive to you as a consumer. There's more of a interaction often with the relationships that the activity in the community itself you'll see from the utility and engagement in community affairs. A lot of utilities do that, but I think in public power that's one way to talk about this personal investment in our local areas.
From episode 36, April 2024. The Value of Hydropower with Dan Severson. A detailed look at TID's largest carbon-free generation source. So, as the name implies, hydropower is generating electricity with water. But how does hydropower generation actually work? Can you give us kind of an overview?
Sure. At the highest level, water moves through a turbine, which is a piece of machinery that is made to spin from the velocity that the water creates. That spinning turns a shaft, which will in turn induce electrical current into between a rotor and a stator, and induce electrical current into a generator, which is stepped up to voltages that are ultimately used on the grid for our customers.
Okay. And are there different types of hydropower plants?
There are. So a majority of our hydropower comes from what's called an impoundment type of arrangement, where we hold water behind a dam. There is a power tunnel that water is released. There's elevation involved, and it creates what's called a head. And that head, how it is directly proportional, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, to the efficiency and the amount of water that it takes to make 1 megawatt of energy varies by the elevation in the head. And so that's probably the most common form of hydropower.
And so our Don Pedro then would be an example of an impoundment dam.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And a lot of power around the state of California, a lot of hydropower is of that category.
Okay. Very good.
Another very common type of hydropower is called run-of-river. This is very popular in the Northwest, Midwest, and the East, where there isn't a lot of reservoirs and dams built, where flows are high, coming through some really big rivers. The Columbia River is one of the, and its confluence with the Snake River creates an extremely fast flows, especially in the spring and the summer. But those are rivers that flow all year. And the federal government back in the 30s and 40s built a series of very big hydropower run-of-river assets that it's the same concept where water passes through a facility, spins a turbine, and induces electrical current into a generator. It's a little less controlled because it's a function of really how the river is flowing.
Okay.
And it's usually limited storage on and off stream to manage those fluctuations.
Okay.
And so when the water comes, you generate.
Then okay. So whereas with Don Pedro, we have our reservoir, we store water, and then we release it as we need to and generate from those releases. Run of river is just literally that. It's as the river is running, you're generating power from it.
Correct.
Okay. Any other types of hydropower plants?
Sure. Well, there's pump storage hydro, and there's also what's called micro hydro, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But pump storage is akin to a battery, where if you have a storage facility like Don Pedro, when demand is low, you can pump water up into an upper reservoir when prices are low or demand is low, and then you can release water out of that upper holding pond down through some hydro facilities when demand is high. That's those are resources that are really starting to get a lot of attention, and I'll touch on Red Mountain Bar in a little bit. But it is, due to the influx of renewables and the amount of intermittent generation on the grid, pump storage is really matches well with intermittency, and like you said, does serve as a giant kind of a battery. Okay.
So it's essentially creating that hydro opportunity.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So it allows us to arbitrage low and high prices and demand to better suit our customers' demand and market opportunities without really disturbing our river operations.
Okay. So what are some of the other kind of unique features or contributions that the Don Pedro Powerhouse makes to our portfolio?
So one really big advantage to Don Pedro and hydropower assets in general is that they're extremely fast. And so when you can imagine on any given day, there's a whole bunch of variable type demands on the system. On the generation side, you have wind that can do whatever it wants.
Sure.
Solar that can come on and off depending on cloud cover, storms, sure. Etc. To where those units they go from full output to zero within a matter of seconds.
Sure.
The great thing about hydro is that it's one of the fastest moving ramping. They call it ramping generation types that exists, and so it really helps to smooth out those demands on our system that fluctuate. Another piece of that is the demands on that our customers have. So people flip switches when they want. They put into production when they want. Air conditioning load, and as you can imagine, in the summer becomes a little bit of an issue in the demands on our system. But the challenges really are in the spring and the fall when temperatures are right around that time where we have air conditioning load kind of cutting in and cutting out. We are a summer peaking area here in California. In the Northwest, most of their peaking happens in the wintertime because they have a whole bunch of heating load tied to electric heat pumps, et cetera. And so, a big advantage to hydro, number one, is the speed. The other advantage to hydro is that it's carbon free. It counts, as I alluded to earlier, towards our carbon free portfolio. And then the dispatchability of hydro too, especially in an impoundment facility like we have at Don Pedro, is a real advantage. Not a lot of people are aware, but generally the wholesale market is set from the marginal cost of natural gas, right? So most hydro facilities run the way they run because of the water constraints. Most wind and solar run just as a product of the fuel that's available. And so what fills the gap now, and that's one of the challenges I'll touch on later, is mainly natural gas. And so when the market comes to set the price, usually the generator available to generate the next incremental megawatt of demand is a natural gas generator. And so what we had, a confluence of factors that started in December of 22 and went into January of 23, was some disruptions in the gas market, an extreme cold winter up in the Northwest. There was a few outages in the natural gas infrastructure that caused a price spike. And at the time, we were coming into that thinking, wow, we don't have much hydro generation kind of to offset those costs. That situation quickly changed, and we essentially went from a drought situation to making early releases because of the great information that we had from our hydrology department. That saved us not only a ton of water, but a lot of purchase power and fuel dollars to benefit our customers.
Okay, so kind of the perfect storm, if you will, of all of these factors at the same time, right? You've got natural gas prices that are on the rise, which otherwise would be way askew of what TID had budgeted for as far as that purchase power and fuel cost. But then you also have our hydrology team who's saying, hey, even though we have storage available in Don Pedro, we know that there's X times amount that is going to come into the reservoir, and we're going to at some point have to make releases. So why not start those now and allow us to generate hydropower using those releases and kind of offset some of the cost of purchasing the natural gas with what we're generating from hydropower. Do I kind of have that right?
Absolutely. And I'm it was a real opportunity to grow as an organization. I'd say historically we would fill and spill.
Okay.
Because of the tools that we have now, the collaboration between the hydrology department, trading and scheduling, power control, marketing is all synced up now, and I'm very proud of staff and the way that they all came together to manage that situation, and it was a real benefit to the district.
Absolutely. And I was going to comment on that as well. Like what a group effort to make that happen, and all for the benefit of our customers ultimately.
Absolutely.
From episode 43, November 2024. All Things Rates with Brian Stubbart. Looking at a rate increase is never an easy task, but Brian breaks down the lead up to the TID board's decision. Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics with regard to the electric rates. What are the actual proposed changes?
Well, first off, I think the increase or, the impacts is going to depend on what rate type that you're talking about. Each customer within that rate type is going to feel things differently.
That's right. And I think we have, 27 different rate types? Is that right?
There's quite a few. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So, but yeah, everyone's going to feel it differently because everyone uses power differently.
Sure.
And so, you might be in a rate class that, might have a certain, increase, but you're going to feel that differently within that rate class. But residential is going to feel it differently than commercial. Commercial is going to feel it differently than industrial. Everyone's going to feel it differently, but then you as an individual or you as an individual company is going to feel it individually within that as well.
Based on your usage, sure.
Absolutely. And so, one of the other things that we're looking at when we look at whether or not a rate increase and how that's going to work and the impact it's going to have is we have different metrics that we use here at the district that we are, really focused on to make sure that we maintain the financial health of the district. Mm-hmm. And the two that we really look at is your days cash on hand as well as your debt service coverage calculation. And your days cash on hand, that is established by the cash reserve policy that we have established. The district has a formal reserve policy, and that policy establishes the targeted range in which we want to keep our cash. And so at the lower level on that targeted range is 225 days cash on hand, and on the upper end of that, it's 275 days cash on hand. Now, I will say one of the things that is in the policy is that it is a look back. And so it looks at what the audited numbers are, and it looks back to say, what are those days cash on hand? Well, for these purposes, because we're budgeting and we're planning, we're looking forward. So it's not going to be, the official number of days cash on hand, but it gives us that direction of where we're going. And so we have to start planning for that, because if you wait until you hit it, you may be too late. And so we are looking forward to where we should be. Okay. And so in looking at this, we are noticing that we are going to be dropping below that potentially by the end of this year. There's a good chance of that. But if we don't have any rate increases, there's a very strong likelihood we're going to hit that at the end of 2025.
Okay.
And then the second metric that we look at is debt service coverage. And so looking at the debt service coverage is we budget to 1.5 times the cash available. And what that means is when you take your revenues, you subtract out all of your expenses until you get your operating expenses. Right before you get to your what you're paying for debt service, there's a cash balance there. And that balance needs to be 1.5 times what you're paying in debt service in that coming up year. This coming up year for TID's debt service, this doesn't include WEC, doesn't include Tuolumne Wind, which I should say Walnut Energy Center, and it doesn't include Tuolumne Wind project. But the debt just for TID itself is $34.5 million, which means that total cash available needs to be 1.5 times that $34.5 million. And those are the two metrics that we use to determine, are we doing good as a district where we can maintain rates as they are, or do we need to look at, something else which would include, rate increases?
Okay, so knowing then that other utilities have also likely had to increase rates in our area, how do TID's rates compare to others around the state?
Well, if you're going to compare us to, we consider an IOU or an investor-owned utility within the state, like, for instance, PG&E. Well, TID is significantly lower than the IOUs and PG&E specific.
And TID is a publicly owned utility, so a POU versus an IOU.
Absolutely, yeah. So in comparison to other publicly owned utilities, similar to TID, like you mentioned, a POU, we do have some of the lowest rates in the region and the state. If the proposed rate change is approved, TID would still have some of the lowest rates amongst those within the region.
Okay. And how does that play out over this 3-year rollout that we're considering?
So we did a multi-year comparison to others, and that comparison, shows that we do have lower rates in 2027 compared to others that were just utilizing their 2025 rates. So what we did is we looked at what our rates were in 2020, currently 2025, 2026, 2027, and we compared those with, a couple of publicly owned utilities within the region, as well as with PG&E, and we looked at where we compared with those. But since we didn't have the rates for 2027 for those areas, we had to use what was available. And so for some of those publicly owned utilities, they were their 2025 rates. Some of those were their 2024 rates, but we did those comparisons, and we saw that even with that, we were very comparable with those, and we're lower in most instances than their current 2024 or 2025 rates. There were a couple of instances where it was 2026 where we were comparable, but in 2027 we got a little bit higher, but still very comparable with their 2025 rates.
Okay, so even after we complete this 3-year rollout for the total 15.3% increase, we're still comparable, if not lower, than a lot of our counterparts in the state.
Absolutely.
From episode 53, September 2025, Project Nexus, Solar Over Canals Project Update with Bill Penny. Arguably TID's most talked about pilot project in recent history, Bill brings us up to speed post-project completion. So high level, Bill, can you tell me what is Project Nexus and where are we in the project?
At its very simplest description, Project Nexus is a pilot project to install solar arrays over irrigation canals. It's a project that we like to say is a public-private academic partnership. So there's 4 main project partners: TID, Department of Water Resources, Solar Aquagrid, and the UC Merced research team. Through the planning for Project Nexus, we identified 2 locations within TID's irrigation system to apply this concept and see what its benefits were. Not only is this project going to generate renewable power, but there's also a lot of co-benefits that we expect to come from it. At the end of the day, we've developed 2 sites. Combined, they will be generating approximately 1.6 megawatts of renewable power and cover approximately 1,700 linear feet of TID's irrigation canal system.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get into each of those 2 locations a little bit more, maybe starting with what we call the narrow span.
A very, very exciting naming convention that we came up with for the project.
Could get a little more creative on that one, I suppose, but we'll save that for another day.
Sure. So the 2 sites we pursued, one being the narrow span site, surprisingly covers the more narrow canals. Each canal covers 2 canals. Each canal is approximately 20 feet wide. Combined, the 2 arrays cover approximately 1,400 linear feet of canal. The site produces just over 800 kilowatts of power. And what's unique to this site as compared to the other site is that it includes 2 75 kilowatt batteries. So at this site, we're able to look at the combination of the solar generating facilities with the batteries.
Now, how does that work exactly? Because this spot was chosen in part because it's adjacent to our power infrastructure. And so are we feeding the power generated by the solar panels at the narrow span back onto the grid, or are we applying that power to the batteries for use at a later time?
So the power being generated from the arrays at the narrow span site, it can go either directly to the power grid or it can be stored inside the batteries. So one of the benefits of having the batteries there is that the energy can be discharged at times when the solar is not being generated. The site is also adjacent to one of TID's irrigation regulating reservoirs, which have 4 large hydraulic pumps. So one of the things we're really interested in researching are the interactions of discharging the batteries and powering those pumps in times where power is not being generated from the solar arrays.
That makes sense, yeah. Very good. All right. And so the project at the narrow span site then is fully completed and generating?
Correct. So earlier this year, back in March of 2025, we successfully completed and commissioned the arrays. So for the past 8 months or so, they've been generating power. Okay,
fantastic. All right, then let's jump over to the wide span, which is out in the Hickman area, yes?
Correct. So the other project location we've called the wide span site, and it's in the upper reaches of TID's canal system out in Hickman. It covers a canal that's approximately 115 feet wide. And even though it only covers about 300 linear feet of the canal, it's almost identical in size. So at this site, it's expected to generate just under 800 kilowatts of power. But both this site and the narrow span site include almost the same number of solar panels.
Oh, interesting.
And at this site, we just wrapped up construction at the end of August. So it's just now starting to generate power. And unlike the narrow span site, it delivers power directly to the electrical feeders, directly to the electrical grid. There are no batteries at the wide span site.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, why was the decision made to not include batteries at the wide span site?
We kicked around the ideas in the initial planning of, do we want to install batteries at both sites? Ultimately, it came down to a decision of feasibility and limitations of the pilot project. There's efficiencies to only include batteries at one of the sites. So we feel we're going to be able to understand the interactions between the solar and the batteries just as well at a single site as compared to having them at both sites.
All right. So you served as the project manager for Project Nexus, and as such oversaw the construction of this truly historic project. But it's not like it came with a blueprint. You didn't really have a set of plans that you were building from when you started this. It was literally all brand new. Can you walk me through what the construction was like and what it took to get this project built?
It was a challenge. It was definitely a challenge. The UC Merced research paper considered a new type of technology, a prototype, so to speak, that utilized tension cables as the primary backbone of the structure. There are a lot of expectations that would be more feasible. This would require less material for the structure, be more lightweight, and ultimately would be quicker to install. Unfortunately, after spending a lot of effort to design and engineer that system, seek qualified, interested contractors, got to a point where we just needed to pivot and go to a more traditional elevated solar canopy. But it was very difficult. I think for me, getting from a research-based idea, a research-based concept, and applying that and developing it and being practical with it was just difficult.
Sure.
But very rewarding, to where we are now, to see all the efforts, all the good times, the bad times that we've had on this project. It's been very rewarding to work on this project.
From episode 58, February 2026, Key Initiatives and Milestone Projects with TID General Manager Brad Cohen. Brad's passion for innovation ensures that TID will continue to blaze trails. All right, so tell us about some of the big new initiatives that you've been championing over the last year and a half that you've been general manager.
So the two that stand out they're both similar in the fact that they're long-term planning efforts. And we're calling them the Path to Zero Spill and the Path to Zero Carbon. They are both 20-year plans culminating in 2045.
Okay.
Both of them are looking comprehensively and will be the foundational elements of our actions moving forward.
Okay. Let's get a little bit deeper on each of those then. How about the Path to Zero Carbon? Tell us more about that.
Path to Zero Carbon is on the energy side, and it is really fundamentally supported by State Bill 100 that was passed that puts our path to zero retail carbon by 2045 as an energy provider. The study that we're pursuing is really answering the basic question of what are the various methods, options that we have to look at to get us to the finish line, but more clearly, how do we get to the finish line while maintaining the mission of the district, which is reliable and affordable energy service to our customers. And so fundamentally, this plan will be looking at every option we can think of that has the potential of getting us to the finish line, but at the same time focusing on costs. I feel like a lot of these plans that are created across the state really lack that transparency of what is this going to cost the customer, and we want to be very clear and upfront of those costs. And hopefully, we find a path that maintains our affordability and continues to keep the lights on to this ambitious goal by 2045.
Sure. And anything is possible if you have an unlimited pool of funds, right?
Yes.
So balancing the mandates that we're trying to hit, keeping our rates affordable to the people who depend on our services, and also maintaining that high standard of reliability is not an easy task.
14 of our 17 communities served being disadvantaged just keeps it front and center that affordability is something that cannot be wavered.
Absolutely. Okay, so then what about on the Path to Zero Spill side?
So the Path to Zero Spill is on the water side, and it is really developing a plan to close our system. And what I mean by closing our system is our 250 miles of concrete-lined canals are well over 100 years old. They were built to spill. They are a gravity system. Mm-hmm. And what that means is when supply exceeds demand, we spill to the river. And on average, that's about 45,000 acre feet a year.
That's substantial.
For perspective, that's about 4 inches as it's spread across the irrigated acreage of TID. So definitely significant. And
Sure.
in, even further perspective, an 18-inch year like we had in 2015, available water to our farmers.
Which is drought conditions.
Which is full drought conditions. A couple of those 4-inch years being saved in Don Pedro, that 18-inch year is maybe 26 inches. And that's significantly different for our farmers.
Yeah.
So how do we close the system? That's really what this plan focuses on.
Okay.
Automation of drops, automation of side gates, automated scheduling and ordering. These are big changes, and they won't happen overnight. Obviously, this is a 20-year plan, and 250 miles of canal. It takes a while to make this happen, but the investment for the ability to save that water is really the driver of that. And really, we're saving as much water as possible because there is regulatory pressures where we will not have as much water in the future as we have now. And that's really regulatory pressures and climate change.
All right. So I know as general manager, you've got a lot of irons in the fire, and we've really just kind of scratched the surface here of what's going on at TID right now. But we really appreciate you carving out some time for us. Any parting thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
I think I'd just like to say again one more time that, we're trying at the district to be as innovative as possible. I'm trying to build a culture of this is a great place to work. We have tremendous amount of history at the district, being the first and oldest irrigation district in California, and so many bold and innovative decisions that have happened over time. And just making sure that, sitting in the GM seat, that I take that very seriously, that we each take our share of continuing that legacy, because we wouldn't be able to say we have the highest level of reliability and some of the most affordable services if it weren't for those decisions.
Sure.
And I want every GM for the eternity of TID to be able to say the same thing.
Absolutely.
And in closing, would like to also thank all the staff at the district. We have exceptional workforce at TID, and I wouldn't be able to be on this podcast and say any of the things I'm saying if it weren't for the staff making that possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the TID Water and Power Podcast. You can find TID on Facebook at facebook.com/TurlockID, on Instagram at TurlockID, and on LinkedIn as the Turlock Irrigation District. I'm your host, Constance Anderson. We'll see you again next time.